All right, Miss Tripp, very happy to have you here. We're really excited in our class. We watched last week the video of Philly DA with, my students have some familiarity with you and your background. They know that you were a public defender, and then you were a prosecutor in the Philly DA's office, and now you are a public defender again. Is there anything else that you think that they should know about your background before we go forward?
I think that they should know that my first job out of law school was for the Philadelphia City Solicitor, which is essentially the law department. We're about to be photobombed by my cat.
That's all right. We like cats here.
Yes. So I was at first a lawyer for the city law department. And I did a little bit of commercial litigation for a couple weeks and then transferred into the labor and employment unit. So I did not civil rights. I did labor and employment, like discrimination and ADA complaints and things of that nature for the city of Philadelphia before I was a public defender or a prosecutor.
All right. And ADA complaints are what? I don't think my students are familiar with that.
The Americans with Disabilities Act.
All right. Got it. Okay, let's get started. So first, there's a few questions, just general background questions about your career. Edgar, Natalie, and Milena want to know, why did you decide to become a lawyer?
Well, all my friends told me I was really good at arguing. That's actually a very small piece of it. I was a lot of things before I was a lawyer, and all of those things ended up tangentially touching into the law. And what I thought when I went to law school is that I would get a law degree in order to be a nonprofit executive. I thought I was going to be a, deputy director or an executive director of a nonprofit of some sort, and that the legal background would help me with that. I wasn't going to go to business school because that's where evil people go. Or so I thought at the time. My best friend has a Wharton degree, so I've been proven wrong. Right. But I wasn't really interested in economics, right? I was interested in what limited and or drove social change. And a lot of that's law. So you got to know how it works. And I, in no way, shape, or form, wanted to be a lawyer. I had no intention of being a lawyer. My brother became involved in the juvenile justice system fairly young, and I wanted no parts of it. It was terrible. And then my third year of law school, I went to Drexel. They have a co-op program, which means you go and work for school credit, and it's sort of bigger and heftier than an internship. I worked for I think it was 25 hours a week. And I decided I was going to work with the capital habeas unit of the Federal Community Defenders of the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, which is a lot of words and just means it was a group of lawyers that's whole job was to keep people from being executed that were on death row. So habeas law, and your teacher can tell you more about this, is essentially a very special kind of law that is designed just to get people out of jail, or in death penalty cases to keep people from being executed. And so I worked for them for my entire third year of law school, and I fell in love with criminal defense. It was a torrid affair that I clearly am still not over. Coming back, no matter how much it guts me. And yeah, that's the story.
All right. So you already answered Josh's question. What college did you go to? I think he wants to know what law school you went to. Was Drexel. Where did you go to undergrad?
I went to the University of Pennsylvania. So I was born and raised in southern New Jersey. We do not believe New York is our city. Philadelphia is the city. Okay. That is where we go. And so that is where I went, and that is where I stayed.
All right. Ryan wants to know, what do you think is the most important skill in being a good lawyer?
Listening.
Listening. Can you elaborate on that? Why do you think so?
Oh, goodness Lord. You have to be able to listen at all points in a case. And that means whether you are a litigator like I am, or you're a commercial or transactional attorney, you have to listen to your clients. You have to be able to, and when I say listen, it's not just like, oh, I'm hearing the words you're saying. It's fully engaging with a person who is trying to communicate something to you. It is looking at their body language. It is seeing their facial expressions. It is seeing and recognizing what's going on in their head that they're trying to explain to you. It is recognizing when you are speaking, you are both speaking the same language, but have very different dialects, right? Part of the reason I did end up going to law school is I felt like I grew up very broke, working class, and I felt like I could serve as a translator for my family, because lawyers speak this weird, like you'll hear other lawyers talk about legalese. It's like this weird circumscribed language that doesn't mean a whole lot, and certainly doesn't mean what it often sounds like it means. Like the words all have very specific meanings that aren't what you would normally mean when you say them. And so given that, you can't ask your clients questions and say, well, were you detained, right? We talk about detention a lot in criminal law. And so if you say you were detained, that's just a fancy way of saying, you know, your friend stopped you on the sidewalk and it took you 5 minutes longer to get to class. I'm so sorry, teacher. I was detained by my social studies.
Nobody in this class is saying that they were detained and that's why they didn't get to class on time.
Guys, you should try it, because I guarantee you, at least your English teacher will be like, tell me more. So you can't say that, right? Because your client's either going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. What is this word? Like, what do you mean detained? Or they're going to give you an answer that is not the legal answer, which it's your job to come up with. So that's a little far afield, I think, of what you meant.
No, but I loved your answer because it was so unexpected. You know, I thought, because what's the most important skill to be a good lawyer? I think most people would think, oh, you have to be really smart. You have to be really, great at public speaking. But the fact that listening is the top thing, I think that I think I've already learned something this interview.
Well, because look, if you're gonna beat Elon Musk and get the best deal out of him for Twitter, you got to listen. You got to listen to all the crazy stuff he says on Twitter and other places. You got to listen to his lawyers. You got to read between the lines. So
all right,
it's all listening.
We are moving on now to questions about being a public defender. And I'm going to combine these two because I think they're along the same line. So Christopher wanted to know just what it's like to be a public defender. And Facile was more specific about, because we've talked about how public defenders are overworked and how in general, nationally, there are issues with public defenders having the access to the resources and time to do their job well. And so Facile asked, what is the workload put on public defenders where you work and how does that compare to national? But anything you have to say about how it has been, how it is to work as a public defender would be welcome.
Oh gosh. I mean, it's something can be two things at the same time.
Right.
Not everything is either or. And so being a public defender is both wonderful and awful at the same time. And a lot of that is the workload. But a lot of that is also just the work. Like the reason public defenders are always worried about being overworked and having too many cases is not simply a matter of, oh, I have to work until 8 o'clock at night every day. It's because every single time you have a case file in your hand, that case file is a human being, and you're in charge of that human being's life in the criminal justice system, which is never nothing. Even tiny little things that people don't, oh, it's just a misdemeanor. Oh, it's just a traffic ticket. Oh, it's just a whatever. Those things can have really, really big consequences for the human beings that they're happening to. And you're in charge of it. And so if you're in charge of 150 people all at the same time, I mean, think about like when every single one of your classes gives you homework on the same night. You're like, ah, and you're like, well, I got to do my math homework first because, right, I'm like I'm skating at a B minus and I need to not go below that B minus. I got to get that math homework done first.
Yeah.
And my civics class is going to have to wait because he likes me anyway.
We
Right.
know
And you're a softie.
the lowest priority is the law class for sure.
Yeah.
You don't have to do anything
Yeah.
for that. Yeah.
And so it feels bad when you are
Mhm.
prioritizing one human being over another, and that is difficult. At the same time, there is something truly wonderful about being able to help someone that's lost, and trapped in a system that doesn't see them as an individual generally. That is the whole goal of which is to curtail their freedom in some way, right?
Mhm.
And so helping them and figuring out the best path forward for them is really, really, really great and fulfilling.
Awesome. All right. So I have two questions. I'm combining these two again because I think they're the flip side of sort of the same question. So Raymond wanted to know, have you had cases where you knew your client was innocent and they were still being prosecuted? And
Mhm.
then Julissa and Jasmine wanted to know how it feels to represent somebody who did something really horrible and you have to represent them. So please elaborate on those if you can.
Yes. So I've definitely had cases where the person I like knew they didn't do it. Like absolutely knew. Sometimes I even had like really compelling proof that they didn't do it. And that's the worst. They're the worst cases ever. I will take a guilty client over an innocent client every day and twice on Mondays. I know that probably doesn't sound right to you guys, but it's true because there is nothing more nerve-wracking than knowing you have the fate of an innocent person in your hands. It's awful. The one case I won, and his mom started crying, and his brother started crying, and he started crying, and his brother was speaking Cambodian to his mom because she didn't understand what was happening. She just knew that like the end had come and everyone was crying. So like, was it bad? And I didn't cry, but I went into the back room behind we call it the ante room, and I threw up in a waste paper basket out of sheer relief. It was awful. Thank God I won. Oh, Jesus God. And my friends are like, but you won. Why are you? And I'm like, but what if I didn't? It's terrible.
I hope this interview isn't making you too nervous, but if they have a waste paper basket, feel free to vomit at any time.
Thank you.
All
On
right.
the other
Now,
hand,
what about the guilty
guilty
guy?
people,
Yeah.
guilty people, guilty people deserve lawyers. They deserve a defense. Everybody gets a defense. And if you're a public defender, the reason you have that client is because they are poor, right? Is because they are poor and they do not have money. And why should someone who is guilty and rich get a leg up and be ahead of the game simply because they are rich? Everyone deserves an attorney. Everyone deserves an advocate. Everyone deserves to have someone in their corner when the government is trying to take away their freedom. And so it doesn't matter when you're a public defender if they're guilty, because every morning you wake up and your client is the Constitution. Every day, you are defending the Constitution with every single guilty person that you give zealous representation to. And it's the Commonwealth's burden, right? Or the state's burden, depending on what state you live in. And so if they make it and you did your absolute best and your guy's guilty, then hey, the system worked. And if they don't make it and your guy gets to go home because he's found not guilty because they didn't make their burden, the system also worked because it has to be really high or innocent people will get convicted. And I will tell you, can I go like a little bit off spec?
Please do. Although I will say, I got like 3 pages of questions here. We're never gonna get through them. But go ahead. Keep going.
You got a lawyer on a screen, Seth. All we do is talk.
Exactly. Go ahead.
I will say that for me,
Yeah.
being a prosecutor was much more complicated. It was much more complicated and morally and emotionally complex than being a public defender, because being a defense attorney,
Mhm.
you got your client and that's your job. And you get up and you defend the Constitution. If you're a prosecutor, you have to take in all these other things into account. You have to take in what's best for the community, not just the victim, because you don't represent victims. You represent the government, you represent the state, the whole state, including, in some respects, the defendant's family, the defendant's neighbors, right? And you have to figure out in every individual case what is best for everyone, and also what the law is, etc. And that's really, really hard.
All right. But this is a great segue because we're moving right into prosecutor questions right now. Okay. So just to get started, Josh wanted to know, what were the best things about being a prosecutor? Are there things that you liked about it?
Yeah, I mean, so it was a constant interrogation of myself and what my motives are. Am I being moved by implicit biases? Am I doing what's right for everyone and not just this victim or complainant is often what we call them. And that's good to a certain extent. It's good to always ask yourself what your true internal motivation is, right? Be self-aware. That's another good thing for lawyers to be.
Yeah.
And I did like trying to do justice. I liked being part of a progressive prosecutor's office that was trying to change a system that I felt like was really unfair to my public defender clients, but still trying to help complainants. My job at the DA's office was special investigations, so I did municipal corruption. So I was helping a lot of people who'd gotten beaten up by the government, or government actors acting within their government jobs. So.
All right. So you've talked about good things about being a prosecutor. What was the hardest thing about working in the DA's office?
I mean, I said it already. The hardest thing was
Derek's question, by the way. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Derek,
Good job, Derek.
Yeah. All right.
The hardest thing was not constantly second guessing yourself. The hardest thing was trying to figure out what was right for everybody, right? What was right for the complainant, what was right for the Commonwealth, what was right, for the defendant, all at the same time.
I'm actually going to omit a couple of questions here. I don't know how these are going. All right. How about this one? Saran, Julissa, and Lunar all had some questions about what was appealing to you about being in Special Investigations Unit? And two, there was some schedule. How did you even get that job? You had never been a prosecutor before. Why were they hiring you? So let's hear it.
Well, so I will turn that back on your students a little bit, because what they may not know is that prosecutors leave prosecution every day and become defense attorneys. It's incredibly common. It's probably the most common career path for prosecutors. A bunch of them can become politicians of one sort or another. Some of them go to private civil firms, which don't do criminal work, but a huge number of them become private defense attorneys. Not that many become public defenders, although it's happened. But they go become private defense attorneys because that's where you make a ton of money. And no one ever says boo about it. No one questions them. No one says they're not qualified. Oftentimes, if you go look at their websites, they'll have advertisements talking about how, well, I know how the system works because I was a prosecutor and now I'll be able to help you fight against it even more. And no one gives them any side eye at all. So the fact that when Krasner hired a bunch of public defenders, or himself was a public defender, and everyone screamed about how he wasn't qualified, I say, all right, well, then none of those prosecutors that got those big firm jobs or got these jobs, none of them were qualified either. So that's what I say to that.
All right. And wait, okay, I think you've answered both questions. So Leewin and Eamon wanted to ask about the special investigations unit. like how often do police officers get caught doing bad stuff? You know, what sort of things are they doing? How many cops did you work on cases where you put a cop in jail
Mm,
in your entire time when you were working there?
I can't remember.
Uh-huh.
The district attorney's website might have that number up on
Okay.
it, actually.
Uh-huh.
Um,
But was
police
it not, it
officer,
wasn't that rare. Or was rare.
I mean, it depends on what you mean by rare. We did it more often than any other administration, but often other administrations also
Mhm.
definitely tried police officers. It's certainly not as common as normal, not normal, but like civilian crime in Philadelphia.
Uh-huh.
Um, and in answer to the question, police officers do all the same kinds of things as everyone else. We had police officers who shoplifted in uniform. We had police officers who did much more terrible things like commit um, sexual assault and things of that nature. We had officers who, you know, were accused of stealing things from suspects while they were on the job. And then we had officers who did things like just overstep the boundaries of their lines of duty, and were too rough with suspects. So it went from being an arrest to an assault, that kind of thing. I will also say all anyone wants to talk about are police officers, but special investigations did all of municipal corruption. So it wasn't all anybody wants to know about is the cops, but we
No.
did correctional officers, we did court officers, we did teachers who embezzled things.
I,
Um,
the ethics club is on the level. We have not embezzled anything yet.
yeah.
All right.
So
Listen, I have a great question then from Christopher following up on this broad thing. Is there a prosecutor whose job it is to prosecute dirty prosecutors?
yes.
All right.
Yeah. No, that's a thing.
Uh-huh.
So if we got a complaint, if the district attorney's office got a complaint that one of our prosecutors was doing something corrupt, like say fixing tickets for people that he or she knew, right? We could do a very beginning investigation just to sort of, make sure the allegations weren't completely made up.
Mhm.
And then as soon as we got to the point where we realized it needed a real investigation, we would call the Attorney General's office, which are the statewide prosecutors. And so the Attorney General's office, anytime there's a conflict of interest like that,
Got
the
it.
Attorney General's office would go in and take over the investigation and make sure everything was or was not, legit.
All right.
And they have their own special investigations unit for these kinds of cases.
All right. A couple more questions about, so this is another special investigations units question about police shootings. How often did you see those? And if you think there are too many police shootings, this is from Facile, do you think, what would you attribute the cause of this to? Is it bad laws, poor training, lack of effective punishment, or others?
So I will say the number of police shootings has been going steadily down. I think 2021 might have been a little bit of a rise, but it's been going steadily down since the federal government came into Philadelphia and did a review and decided that we had way too many shootings and, demanded a bunch of changes of the police department. And so a lot of those changes, but not all, went into effect. And the shootings did start to steadily decrease. They have decreased more under Krasner, but it's hard to give any reasons. Like, I'm not going to say, oh, good, your cat is
I
also
know
here.
my cat's making an appearance now.
Um,
We got them both. Yep.
so, causation is really tricky. So I'm not going to go down that road.
Yeah.
All police shootings are too many police shootings in some respects, right?
Yeah.
But police do have dangerous jobs, and sometimes they do have to fire their weapons. So what do I attribute it to? I know before the federal government came in and and did the report. One of the biggest causes of police shootings was what they called a mistake of object, meaning people would reach for their cell phones, and the police would just see a bulge and assume it was a gun.
That
And
is
so that was,
literally we're going to discuss our mock trial in a bit. I got to get to
yeah.
that quickly because that's related to our mock trial. All
All
right.
right.
One more question. Okay. Frana wants to know what she knows about on the news and everything, body cam footage that police officers are supposed to have. Shouldn't that be stopping all that stuff? Did you find that body cam footage was useful and helpful in prosecuting bad police officers?
Yeah, I mean, body cam footage is amazing,
Okay.
for everyone, not just for special investigations, but for regular prosecutors, right?
Okay.
So often police officers, catch statements on the body cam, just video in general. It's a great help for the prosecution and also for defense. The issue is it slows everything down because you have
Yeah.
hours and hours and hours of footage to watch.
Yeah.
So it's great, but it's not going to stop anything because, for like example, that mistake of object case, you might see a police officer fire his gun at someone, but you don't know whether, just because it's on the body camera doesn't show you everything that that police officer was seeing and experiencing at the time. And they're only chest high, right? So the angles are a little bit different than they would be if they were at eye level.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's really helpful and sometimes it's not helpful at all. Like if police officers are down on the ground wrestling with someone, that body camera is not going to show you anything. You're going to hear a lot of stuff, which is also helpful.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a great tool, but it is not the answer to solve all crime or close cases.
All right. This is the last question that's specifically about prosecutor's office, but Darnell, Natalie, and Saran are all interested in the emotional toll that it takes to work as a prosecutor. They want to know how emotionally, mentally draining is it to be a public prosecutor? How do you feel having to deal with these heavy topics and witness the distress of others? How do you stay positive? Does the job ever get to be too much? What are your feelings about that?
Yeah, I mean, both public defenders and prosecutors, the job is a lot. It's a lot. And you have to have good coping skills and, a lot of supportive friends and family to get through it and not have it really drag you down. Just what I said, it's really heavy trying to do what's right for everybody all the time. As a prosecutor, you kind of have to always be worried. Like, if you show somebody leniency, are they going to go out and do something terrible? And then you're going to feel like it's your fault, even though it's not, because it's the person that did the terrible thing's fault, right?
Yeah.
So you just have to kind of keep your eye on the ball. And the same thing for being a defense attorney, right? Like, you do what you can for the people that you can at the time that you can. And, as long as you're working hard, that, you got to give yourself some credit for that.
All right. Well, that actually kind of segues into Fasil's question, just about why do you keep doing these jobs that are so hard? Why are you in the public sector? He asked, is the pay good? Do you have passion and drive? What would you gain or lose if you cashed in and went into private practice? What's your deal?
Fasil, let me tell you about what my mother has to say about that question.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Because I think private practice is, relatively speaking, a lot more boring. Other people would disagree with me. Some people really, really like transactional litigation, right? They like hammering out deals. They like the barter. They like that kind of tug of war where the stakes are money and it's more of a game, right? I don't find that personally fulfilling. I want to be helping people. The pay is not good. It's better than it was. I am lucky because I got a number of scholarships, so I don't have a lot of the massive student loans that many people in law do. That means they have to go into private practice. But why do I keep coming back? Because, you gotta enjoy what you do, and it's brutal sometimes. And sometimes you need a break. and that's important to take that break. But I gotta tell you, I had a really good friend who was, well, not a really good friend, a really good colleague. Um, and he was a prosecutor for many years, and he quit. He went into private practice, and then lo and behold, he came back, and I was like, "What's this?" And he was like, "Tracy, it was like watching paint dry." And
Uh,
I have heard that from more than one prosecutor, right? That it's just not, the money's good, but it's just not quite the same amount of meaning.
uh-huh. All right. Well, I have a whole series of questions. It's a kind of war story question. So I'm gonna read them all to you, and then you can pick and choose if you want to tell any story. So Ruth wanted to know what your most successful case was. Josh wanted to know what your most difficult case was. Gerald and Lee Wen wanted to know the most serious or controversial case you've had. Leonard wanted to know your most satisfying and least satisfying cases. Reham and Raymond wanted to know the most stressful case you prosecuted. And Edgar wanted to know, have you had a case that you expected to lose, but were you surprised that you won? So if you have any cases that apply to any of those
Oh my
categories, feel free
God.
to share.
I'm sure I've had one case for each of those things for sure.
Uh-huh.
The most frustrating case was a case I had that I lost as a defense attorney. And to this day, I feel like I lost because the prosecutor cheated. So that was the most frustrating. I haven't looked. The office did appeal it after I became a prosecutor. So I don't actually know what happened. I might have won it on the back end, but that's not very satisfying as a defense attorney because while you're waiting to see if you won, your client's sitting in jail.
Yeah.
What's my most satisfying? That's hard.
Maybe
There
the
were a lot of,
Cambodian guy where he barfed in the
well, that
room.
was
That
that
seems pretty
wasn't
satisfying.
satisfying. I was
Leaving.
relieved. That was my most successful case. That was my
Uh-huh.
most successful case.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then a case I did right after that was a 21-year-old who was accused. She was charged in a conspiracy. Her boyfriend was convicted of shooting a cab driver, and she was in the cab with him. And she was found not guilty, and her boyfriend got 21 years. So that's probably my most successful case. She didn't do that either. And then I gotta tell you, some of the most satisfying are like the little tiny ones. Like a kid here, and I say kid because he was like 19 years old, was arrested for vandalism because he was selling a stop sign
Uh-huh.
for cash. I don't know if you've scrapping in
Uh-huh.
Maryland, but he
Right.
was selling a stop sign, and the cops were like, "That's not your stop sign."
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, "Look, man, it was already broken off. I found it under the I-95 overpass. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, what?" And he didn't have any criminal record. And, once you get a criminal record, it's hard. Life becomes harder.
Yeah.
And I convinced the judge that because they didn't bring in anybody from the Department of Transportation, nor could they prove that he actually was the one that took the stop sign out of the street, which is hard. These are cemented into the sidewalk, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the bottom is clearly broken. So I convinced the judge that there was no ownership or non-permission, and
Uh-huh.
she found him not guilty. And
Oh,
it was amazing. And he doesn't have a criminal record. And
that
I
is
was really happy
awesome.
about it.
All right, good stuff. All right, Milena wants to know. All right, so we are at the 30 minutes that I was intending to go, but I have probably like 10 more minutes that I could go. You want to do it?
Sure.
All right, thank you so much. All right, so Milena wants to know what a normal day in your life is like. And I guess that's now as a public defender, but maybe as a prosecutor. I don't know, however you want to answer it, go for it.
I mean,
I guess it's like how much are you working? Do you get to have fun in your life?
oh yeah. I mean, there's
All right.
plenty of fun in life, right?
All
And
right.
and on both sides, I will say that, you know, a normal day when you're not in court is, it can be 9 to whatever or 8:30 to whatever. Um, it's court that makes it crazy, right? Because if you're on trial, then you're on trial from 9 o'clock in the morning, which really means 7:30 or 8, because you get up and you have to put your face on and put your suit on and, pack your high heels in a bag because women still need to wear high heels because we live in a patriarchal society, and girls hear
Preach
me.
it. Yeah.
And so, you got to get that all together. You go to work, you get prepped. The trial starts at 9, and then the trial can go anywhere from 3:30 up to like 5:30 if the judge is like, we're going to get this done today. And so you just work all day. You have like a half an hour to like go get a banana at lunch. And then you go back to the office, and then you prep for the next day,
Yeah.
which is like you're staying there at night typing motions to argue to the judge the next day of the trial, or typing up your closing argument because you're going to tell the jury what to do the next day. And so those days are really, really long. Those are like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock days. But, if you're not on trial and you're not prepping for trial, you can squeeze some like normal 8-hour work days. And it's the city. And so you get a lot of government holidays. So, there's also light days like that too.
Not so terrible. All right. Now, this is the most important part of the interview right now, because Jasmine has asked you for advice for our mock trial. Let me describe to you what our mock trial is. It's in about 2 weeks, we're doing a mock trial. The case is about a teenager who is hanging outside his school, and then the cops came over and were like, hey, show me your ID. We don't think you really go to this school. And then the teenager was kind of blowing him off, and they were like, show me the ID, we're gonna arrest you. The teenager reaches into his pocket, claiming he's getting his ID, but the officer sees something shiny in the pocket, right? Grabs the kid. There actually is like a little pocket knife in there, and there's a scuffle, and both of them get hurt. The cop goes crazy, breaks the kid's wrist, and then now the kid is being prosecuted for assaulting a police officer. And so the question is, do you have advice both for the direct examination for our prosecutors who want to examine the cop, or for our defense lawyers who are going to be cross-examining these cops about how we're going to win the jury over here?
Oh my goodness. Well, know your material. So like know the laws. So if you're the prosecutor, there's probably some really good law that says that kid is resisting arrest, and also that the police officer is allowed to prevent himself and other people from being injured. So argue the law, and make sure when you're asking your witness questions, if you're a prosecutor, make them as specific as you can, right? And if you're a defense attorney, then you need to get in at the feelings of it, right? Okay. You need to ask that cop, like, well, isn't it like everything's a leading question? Did you tell them about leading questions?
We talked about leading questions. They know about cross-examination, the difference between direct examination and cross-examination.
All right.
We're not dealing with amateurs here. Come on. Let's get to the good stuff. All right. Yeah. So yes, let them talk. If you're cross-examining, don't let them talk. If you're doing the direct, bring it on.
Yeah.
Right.
But prep your witnesses. If you're doing it direct, you got to let them know, like practice, like actually sit down and practice with them, because it's weird. It's crazy being up on a stand. And if you're a defense attorney, it's all about the feelings. Well, isn't it true that,
all right.
I don't, you were scared of that, I don't know. You were angry at that teenager. Isn't it true you were angry at him? You were angry. He questioned your authority. Isn't that right, officer?
Ooh, that's good stuff, Lunar. You got to use that. You got to use that. All right. Okay. Now we just have a few questions just about the criminal justice system generally and your feelings about it. So I guess Ryan and Eamon, they asked a very broad question. What are your thoughts on shortcomings and strengths of the criminal justice system as you see it right now?
Yeah. I mean, the shortcomings are legion. Everyone is overworked on both sides, and people who are overworked make mistakes, and the work that gets done in courthouses is too critical to really allow that. So more attention needs to get paid to properly staffing both sides. And efficiency is really prized, and it shouldn't be. Like, everyone's worried, particularly post-COVID or mid-COVID, wherever we are now. It's like, oh, there's a backlog. You got to get it done. You got to get it done. But courthouses should not be assembly lines. And too often, particularly with lower level cases, because people think they aren't serious, even though one fight in a bar at 22 can prevent you from getting a public safety or a nursing gig or into medical school for the rest of your life, right? Depending on what you get convicted of, and where you live. People need to pay attention to those supposed low level crimes, and give them the time and energy they deserve, and try and keep people out of that level of the criminal legal system as much as possible.
Okay. Well, what Darnell wanted to know, what criminal justice issue upsets you the most or enrages you the most? He gave some examples because he knows he's watched the video. He knows like corrupt police, lying lawyers, lack of accountability. Is there anything that just really gets you?
I mean, I think procedural justice is the thing that bothers me the most. And that is why I became a DA, because I felt like the same rules needed to apply to everyone, and they are not often applied equally. So procedural justice, and an even-handed application of the law, I would say, because abuse of power is, for me, the worst thing.
Natalie wanted to know, have you seen any changes in the criminal justice system over the course of your career, either positive or negative? Like, are we moving in the right direction? What do you think?
I mean, yeah, I think people are much more aware of the criminal justice system. I think, it used to be that it was just this thing where bad people went, and everybody assumed that if you got arrested, you were guilty of something. I don't think that's true anymore. I think people are much more aware of mass incarceration and of racial disparities in who gets arrested and how they're treated after they're arrested. And all of that's really good.
All right. Okay, so one last question. This one I forgot to do from the prosecutor section, but I like it. And I'm glad that we're ending on this because I think it's a good question. Saran wanted to know, when you were at the prosecutor's office, do you feel as though you were able to bring any change to the community? We saw the video where you said, you wanted to go to the prosecutor's office to make a difference. Do you feel like your time there actually made a difference?
I mean, it's a hard question because it's generational work. I don't think 4 years or even 8 years is going to make the kind of sustained change that you need. Like, there's just too much to fix. But in the short term, sure, right? Like, there were people whose cases would not have gotten prosecuted that got prosecuted because we had, a progressive prosecutor who staffed his special investigations unit with people who are willing to do the work and take the heat and move forward on cases.
But do you think these are lasting changes, or if Larry Krasner is no longer the DA at some point, which will happen eventually, is it just going to go back to the old way? Or do you think that the world has changed enough that maybe these are lasting changes that you're making?
I think some things are probably lasting. Like, I just don't see a world in which even the police really feel like, arresting sex workers all the time, Philly in particular has bigger and worse crimes to kind of focus on. As we see marijuana legalized more and more, I should say decriminalized because it's different, right? As we see marijuana decriminalized, I think that's probably going to stick. And there are some specific changes that Krasner made that I think will stick no matter what, like open file discovery, which I'll let you explain to them. Right.
Christopher and Edgar know about discovery. They taught our whole class about it. So
nice.
we'll have Christopher and Edgar explain.
Yeah, but open file is like one of the things that, like, once you do it, like, how is a prosecutor going to come in after Krasner and be like, just kidding, you don't get to see all this anymore. We're not hiding anything. We just don't want you to see it. Like, it's never going to happen. Yeah. But some of the other things, like his bail policies, until the entire culture shifts and everyone thinks cash bail is bad or recognizes that cash bail for low-level offenses disproportionately impacts low-income people who are disproportionately people of color. Like until that really sticks in the judiciary, yeah, of course. That's why it's generational work, not just one-term, two-term work.
Well, this has been really great. I really thank you so much, Ms. Tripp, for coming to our class. I think everybody's going to really appreciate that. We loved watching the video with you. You're a star, and you're welcome in the class anytime.
Well, I hope it was interesting. Let me know if you have like specific follow-up questions. I can shoot you an email. You can read them off.
All
And I
right.
know I'm a lawyer, like I said. All we do is kind of digress and talk. So hopefully I stayed on point enough.
I think we did a great job here. I have no complaints. All right.
All right.
Have a great weekend. All right.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks. Good luck, guys. Good luck in the mock trial.